At 12 minutes past 5 on the morning of April 18, 1906, the ground beneath San Francisco shook itself awake, and within the hour, the city's water was gone. The hydrants gave only air. The mains lay shattered under the streets. A mile from the bay, fire crews stood holding dry hoses while the first columns of smoke climbed into the dawn.
I'm Arthur, and what follows is not really the story of an earthquake.
It is the story of a city ringed by water that burned for 3 days because it had nothing left to drink.
To understand what was lost, you first have to understand how quickly it was built. Within a single human lifetime, San Francisco had gone from a windswept cluster of canvas tents to the financial capital of the American West. The gold rush had done that. It pulled 250,000 dreamers around Cape Horn and across a continent and emptied their fortunes into one boomtown on the bay. The tents hardened into brick and stone and redwood. By 1906, nearly 500,000 people lived here, in a city that had taught itself in 50 years to rival the capitals of Europe. They even borrowed the name. They called it the Paris of the West. The gold had pulled the whole world onto one narrow peninsula. Sicilian fishermen and Irish dockhands, Chinese laborers and German merchants, all crowded together at the edge of the continent. But look closer at what that city was actually made of. Beneath the marble lobbies and the granite banks, the real San Francisco was a city of wood. Block after block after block of redwood Victorian houses, painted and gabled and packed shoulder to shoulder up every hill. It was magnificent. It was also, though no one liked to say it out loud, an enormous stack of kindling drying in the salt air. And all of it, every wooden street, every gilded hotel, was defended by a single thing: water. Water moving quietly through iron mains buried under the pavement. Water held in old brick cisterns beneath the street corners. Water no one ever saw and no one ever thought about. As long as that water flowed, San Francisco could not burn. But the mains were aging. The cisterns had been left to rust for a generation. The pressure was a matter of faith. None of it seemed to matter on a normal day. The trouble was that the city did not sit on normal ground. It sat astride one of the most dangerous fault lines on Earth, and almost no one wanted to remember it. Everything you were about to see was standing on the morning of April 17, 1906. By the end of that week, almost none of it would be left. So walk it with me while it's still here.
Begin where the city begins, on Market Street. 120 feet wide.
The grand diagonal artery of San Francisco, loud with the clang and rattle of cable cars hauling themselves up grades too steep for any horse. The cable car was the city's own invention, and it had made the impossible hills livable. Halfway along Market stands the Palace Hotel, 2.5 acres of it, called the finest hotel in the world. Carriages roll in through an archway into a vast central court, ringed by 7 stories of white balconies beneath a roof of glass. In its marble and its splashing fountains, the palace shows off water the way other cities show off gold. Proof that San Francisco could summon anything it pleased. The hotel had even sunk 4 artesian wells of its own and kept more than 600,000 gallons in a great reservoir beneath its central court, a private reserve in case the city's water should ever fail it. Now climb. The cable car drags you up out of the commercial flats and onto Nob Hill, where the men who built the railroads built their homes. Stanford, Crocker, Hopkins, Huntington, the Big Four, had crowned the summit with palaces that looked down on the whole city and the bay beyond. And yet many of those palaces, for all their towers and grandeur, were built of wood. Enormous, ornamented mansions of timber, dressed up to look like stone. The higher the city climbed, the farther it stood from the bay below. It was building its wealth uphill, away from the water it would one day need. Look down from the hill and you can see the city's pride, the new city hall, a great domed colossus that had taken nearly 27 years and a fortune to finish, the largest public building in the West. It had been raised, as it happened, on the soft fill of a drained marsh. No one thought much about that either. And San Francisco reached for the sky. The Call building rose 19 stories, a steel-framed tower among the tallest west of Chicago, the city announcing that it belonged in the same sentence as New York. Yet a single step from the luxury hotels lay another San Francisco entirely. The lantern-lit alleys of Chinatown, the largest Chinese community outside Asia, and the saloons of the Barbary Coast down by the waterfront, where the gold money was spent after dark. It was a city of dazzling contrasts, awake at every hour of the night. And it was, above all, a working city by the sea. Each evening the fog poured in through the Golden Gate and swallowed the hills street by street until the lamps floated in gray. Down at the wharfs, the fishing fleet, Sicilian families mostly, unloaded the day's catch in the dark, while south of Market Street lay what may have been the most crowded quarter west of Manhattan. Irish dock workers packed into wooden boarding houses where people like to say you could do business in 5 languages before noon. Wood and people and lamplight stacked street upon street, and every block of it trusting the same buried pipes. And under all of it, the marble, the palaces, the steel tower, the crowded alleys ran the same thin lifeline, the water in the pipes. One man spent his nights worrying about it. He was the city's fire chief, and he was afraid.
On the evening of April the 17th, the city was at its dazzling best.
At the Grand Opera House, in a blaze of gaslight and diamonds, the most famous voice on earth was singing. Enrico Caruso, the great Italian tenor, took the stage as Don José in Carmen. And when the final curtain fell past 10:30, the audience, among them the young actor John Barrymore, rose to him in a roar. Not one of them could have known that their city had fewer than 7 hours left to live as they knew it. Caruso went back to his suite on the 5th floor of the Palace Hotel and slept content. While the opera crowd dreamed of the season ahead, one man lay awake over the thing none of them would name. Dennis Sullivan, chief of the fire department, had spent years studying the maps of the city's water, and what he saw frightened him. The emergency cisterns that were meant to save San Francisco had been left to decay. The mains were old. The pressure was a hope, not a fact. While the grand hotels splashed clean water in their fountains to impress their guests, the tanks that were supposed to fight a great fire sat half-empty and forgotten beneath the streets. 3 years earlier, Sullivan had begged the city to build a second water system, a high-pressure network that could pump the bay itself onto a burning city. It was judged too expensive and quietly shelved. He had put his whole fear into a single sentence. This town, he warned, sits in an earthquake belt. One of these fine mornings we'll get a shake that knocks our little water system out, and then we'll have a fire. No one listened. So the city slept beneath a clear spring sky, certain of its own future. And in a little over 4 hours, the one man who had truly seen what was coming would be the first it lost.
It was still dark when it came, 12 minutes past 5.
For less than a minute, the ground beneath San Francisco heaved like the deck of a ship in a storm. Across town, the proud new city hall shrugged off its stone in seconds, the soft marsh ground beneath it amplifying every wave, until nothing was left but the bare steel skeleton of its dome, standing naked against the dawn.
Cable car tracks twisted like wire, brick walls fell into the streets, and on Bush Street, beside the firehouse where the chief lay sleeping, the heavy ornamental tower of the California Hotel collapsed under the building below. Dennis Sullivan fell through 3 floors. The one man who knew how the city might be saved was struck down in the very first minute of the disaster, his own prophecy falling on his own head. He would die days later, never knowing how completely, how terribly he had been right. Then the shaking stopped. For a moment the city stood, dazed but alive. People stumbled out into the streets in their nightclothes, standing in the pale early light among the fallen cornices and the broken glass, not yet understanding what had begun. And then the smoke began to rise, first 1 column, then a dozen, then more than anyone could count. Overturned stoves, cracked chimneys, severed gas lines, all across the wooden city, small fires bloomed. On any ordinary morning, a single engine would have drowned each one in minutes. For the city's firemen, the true catastrophe was only beginning. They ran out their hoses, fixed them to the hydrants, turned the valves, and got nothing but the hiss of air in empty lines. Where the great mains crossed the old buried creeks and filled in marshland, the shaking had turned solid ground to liquid and snapped the iron pipes apart in 300 places. Every hydrant for blocks stood dead. You could stand in the street that morning and see the whole bitter joke of it. The bay, a mile off, flat and bright and blue, holding all the water in the world, and not a single drop of it could be carried to the flames. The city ringed by water had learned in one morning that it had nothing to drink. What happened next turned a dozen separate fires into one. With no water in the mains, the army marched down from the Presidio and tried to blast fire breaks with gunpowder and dynamite. But inexperienced men with explosives in a city of wood often did more harm than good, throwing burning debris onto rooftops the fire had not yet reached, so that the separate blazes leaned toward one another and joined hands. By afternoon, they had become a single firestorm, so fierce it generated its own wind, marching block by block over the hills. Ash fell from the sky like gray snow, and the roar of it could be heard for miles.
One by one, the great landmarks went. The Palace Hotel had ridden out the earthquake almost untouched, and for a while it fought the fire with its own wells and that vast private reserve. But the water was drawn down hour by hour into a losing battle until the great cistern beneath the court ran dry, and when the flames closed in that Wednesday afternoon, the finest hotel in the world burned like any wooden house on any wooden street. For 3 days and 3 nights it burned. Tens of thousands of people streamed down toward the ferries to Oakland and up into the heights, dragging trunks and pushing carts piled with everything they owned, and from the hilltops they watched their own streets disappear one by one. The refugees camped by the thousand in Golden Gate Park, on the parade grounds of the Presidio, on the cold sand at the edge of the sea. By the time it was over, the fire had consumed some 28,000 buildings across nearly 500 city blocks and left more than 250,000 people, over half of San Francisco, with no home to return to. And yet, here and there, the city fought back with whatever it could find. As the flames poured down toward the Mission District, the hydrants there stood dry, as they did almost everywhere. In a city of more than 4,000 hydrants, only a few dozen still held any pressure at all. But one of those few stood on high, firm ground at the top of the hill beside Dolores Park, on the corner of 20th and Church. Its water still came down by gravity from a reservoir up in the heights, along a line that, unlike the mains that had snapped apart in the soft, filled ground of the valleys below, had somehow held. Word spread that it still had water. When the horses could not haul the heavy engines up the steep grade, hundreds of ordinary people threw their own shoulders against the machines and dragged them up the hill by hand, to the one hydrant that somehow still gave. That single lonely stream held the line. The mission survived because of one working pipe and a crowd that refused to let it burn. But the last great stand came at Van Ness Avenue. By the third day, the fire had eaten its way west, and the city fell back to its broadest boulevard to draw a final line. There, the army made a desperate choice. They dynamited the mansions of the rich, block after block of the finest homes in San Francisco, blowing them flat to open a gap too wide for the flames to leap. The Navy ran hoses up from the bay and pumped seawater into the fight. Neighbors soaked blankets and curtains and carpets in salt water and beat the embers down by hand. And there, on the morning of April 21st, against the wind, the fire finally died, stopped at last, not by the city's own water, which never came, but by the sea itself, carried uphill by hand and hose.
When the smoke cleared, San Francisco did something quieter than rebuild. It chose how to remember.
In the years that followed, the city preferred to speak of the Great Fire rather than the Great Earthquake, because a fire could strike any city on Earth, while an earthquake whispered something far more dangerous, that the very ground could not be trusted. A young city living on the confidence of distant investors could not afford that whisper. The official count of the dead was set at 478. Patient research a century later would put the true number above 3,000. It was not until 2005 that the city formally accepted how many it had really lost. But underground, San Francisco told itself the truth. It finally built the Dead Chief's system, the high-pressure network Sullivan had begged for, with its own reservoirs up in the hills, its own cisterns beneath the streets, and pump stations that could draw salt water straight from the bay he had died wishing he could reach. It was finished in 1913, 7 years too late for him. And to this day, San Francisco remains the only city on Earth that keeps a second, separate water system buried beneath it, waiting quietly for the morning the first one fails again. And once a year, at dawn on the 18th of April, a few people climb the hill above Dolores Park to a single ordinary fire hydrant, the one that never stopped giving water, and they paint it gold. Stand on that corner today, beside the gold-painted hydrant, and the city gives nothing away. Bright, rebuilt, certain of itself. Nothing in it tells you that these are the streets of the second San Francisco, that the first, the city the gold conjured in a single lifetime, burned to nothing in 3 days because the one thing it was ringed by was the one thing it could never reach. They still call it the Great Fire. But the hydrant, the ground, and one long-dead fire chief always knew better.
San Francisco was ringed by water, but burned for 3 days because it had nothing left to drink.
Tombstone was built in the driest desert in America, but it drowned in dark underground water. If you want to see how the desert patiently took back the Silver City, watch the Tombstone video next.
Subscribe, and let's keep exploring. See you on the next journey.
Before we finish, I want to take a moment to recognize the people appearing on screen right now. To the members of this channel, thank you so much. Your ongoing support is what motivates me and helps keep this project alive. If you enjoy what we do here and would like to directly support the channel, I invite you to click the Join button down below. To our members and to everyone who is simply watching this video, thank you for your time.